So many people think that it's only the young that experience the things, the brief things, and that they have nothing to learn or to be actually showing others of us of what to do. But that's not really true. In life, it's not about the fact that it's age that is the factor or the key factor of being the real person out there and being the teacher. The teacher, in fact, can be any one of us. So, it's the old story is when the teacher shows up, or when this teacher shows up, the student arrives, or vice versa. Like, maybe I got it all mixed up, but you get what I mean,
You
right?
understand. Yeah, we've heard that one before.
So thank you today for joining us on Let's Get Real. My name is Glenda Kroll, and my side partner and chow here is...
I'm Nicole Harvick, and I am Glenda's trusty sidekick, always here on Wednesday, ready to meet new guests. And of course, today's no exception. And I just love these Wednesdays. And I met this young man on the OWL app. And if you don't know what the OWL app is, it is an app where you can go, and owls are very wise. So we are vetted on OWL, those of us who wish to become an OWL expert. And I spoke with him a couple months ago, I guess, and I absolutely enjoyed my conversation so much. And Glenda's talking about youth, but I have to tell you, sometimes you can learn more from someone who is younger and more open-minded than those of us who might be a little bit older and closed-minded. So I was really intrigued by this young man, and I thought he would make a great guest. So here we are today, and he has shown up. So I want to introduce him. And some of these things, I don't know what they are. He's going to explain that. He is the founder of Couple O Nukes. He is the founder of Radiating Faith. He is a podcaster. He is an actor. He is a voice actor. He's an author and a comedian. And I thought he was pretty funny just to talk to. He had a great sense of humor, very nice guy. And he goes of the name by Mr. Whiskey. So let's bring Mr. Whiskey to the stage, Glenda.
Let's have a shot of Mr. Whiskey. Hey,
how are you today?
I am doing amazing. It's great to be with fellow podcasters who want to help change lives and spread a good message. So it's always great to have that opportunity. So I thank both of y'all a lot. And it's interesting y'all kept talking about the age, because one of the things I hear the most is, well, you seem young, because I always start with what I do. And then people will be like, well, that doesn't line up right. And, age is really just a number that humans made. It's really our experience that defines us. I had a lot of childhood trauma. I had military service, and then the transition out has been crazy hectic, still battling with stuff every day, both military and civilian side. And so it's really forced me to age, which is great in terms of the life I'm living now. But it did rob me of having a childhood. And, so there's a lot of things I see. I'm like, wow, I wish I had that, or I could have that. So sometimes the age and the experience is a burden as much as it is a blessing.
Oh, wow. That's huge. And that's very, very true. But I do believe that, our experiences are so important to us, because it's those experiences that make us become better people, right? So how we can relate to others and so forth. And things, in my opinion, don't happen to us, they happen for us.
Yeah. And what's interesting about your comment, Mr. Whiskey, is that I was teaching a class once. And one of the things that I said, let's all go back to our childhood when it was fun and carefree. And a lady, she kind of got tears in her eyes, and she says, not everyone has that. And that was, I was basing it on my childhood, not even giving a thought to there is a lot of childhood trauma, actually. So, I would love to talk about that with you.
Sure. It's interesting because on some levels, I feel like maybe I'm just being too selfish, and that's due to the influence of the entertainment industry, which is always that classic mom, dad, grandparents are alive and healthy. Everyone meets for the holidays. And so that's the ideal everyone chases. But the more people I talk to, and I'd have to see, because again, all the people I talk to are in the same kind of life path. And so I wonder, all the nuclear geniuses I met, most of them, if not all of them, had some kind of awful childhood trauma. Most of the people in the military in general. And so, it's hard for me to make an evaluation that is not biased, but it has me wondering, I've written a lot about how our childhood impacts us, and one of the interesting things is a lot of the relationships I've been in and a lot of my ideas around family all center from what is normal versus ideal. And a lot of the guests I've had on my show have spoken about how a lot of relationships are unhealthy because I come from the generation where most of our parents are divorced or married for the wrong reason, stay together for the kids, whatever you have.
Yeah.
So our normal is, hey, our dad treats our mom this way or vice versa. I had a guy come on my show and he thought everyone's dad would just smash all the furniture anytime they got mad. To him, that was normal. And I had a woman, Ms. Shay Sparks. She thought that dads didn't hug their kids. She saw her dad hugging her friend and she was like, what is that? Because she never got that. And so it really has me thinking. And the more I, talk to these other people and look back on my life, I really put together these pieces of my life that were so influenced that I didn't even realize were so influenced.
It's
Wow.
true. We too many times, like we only we are, especially in the early part of life, we are what we've seen and what we've experienced and lived through. It's only later on if we open ourselves to different experiences. And then I guess the other big factor is also, when we can spend time and we can read about different characters and different facets of life, is when we can learn as well. And unfortunately, we're living also in a world of people not reading as much anymore, right? So there's all these other things. But, if you've never grown up with, a parent who is kind, understanding, what else are you to think? But that's how parents are. And then what ends up happening is that generation, they just mimic what the other generation has been. So things don't change until people start looking and thinking to themselves, wow, maybe I can live a different way than where my parents were to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm curious because you said you've met a lot of people like that in the military. Is the military sometimes an escape to get away from the home, away from the parents, away from abuse? Would you say that?
Oh, of course. Unfortunately, growing up, I've always been very patriotic and I actually didn't want to join the military. I always knew it wasn't, my personality just didn't line up to it. I always had the greatest honor and respect for the people out there fighting for us. But when going through it, it's like, how they say never meet your heroes. It's like when I joined the military, it's not these war movies you see. It's not these posters you see. It's not these commercials you see. What I found is the way things are nowadays, it's not patriotic heroes who want to serve. It's on trying to pay for college, on trying to, I went at peak COVID. So a lot of people just, if college wasn't an option, the military was the only option because the working world was basically shut down,
Right.
And so it was a crazy time for everyone, civilian side, military side. We all know that. And what I found is the rest of the military were the people who just had nowhere else to go in life. And typically these weren't good people, so to speak. They're people who had made a lot of bad decisions or were victims of consequences of the actions of others. And they took all that bitterness and hatred, and then you top that with the stress of the military, and you get just very aggressive people. It is, and unfortunately, that's kind of how the military was. And now, with the retention crisis and the recruiting crisis at an all-time high, they have lowered the standards. You no longer need a GED or a high school diploma. So now we have high school dropouts on the front lines. You've got obesity rise in the ranks. You've got the physical fitness standards have been lowered again and again. And so we're combating the recruiting and retention crisis with, I'll say as respectfully as I can, lower quality members. And the issue too is that our nation is divided against itself, and our nation is really suffering and drowning. And so people don't want to fight, because when they think military, what they're thinking is America, right? Even though they're kind of separate, kind of same, right? And so people who if they're not supporting what's going on in the Middle East or what happened with Hawaii or Ukraine or this or that, they don't want to join, and so it's very unfortunate.
Yeah, and what branch did you serve in?
I was in the United States Navy.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, my dad was in the Navy. He actually loved it, but that was so many years ago. And I'm curious, I remember back, I'm going to say 10, 12 years ago, when we started suffering through this crisis of people not wanting to join, everyone, they were saying, well, we need to bring back the draft. We need to bring back the draft. And I remember John McCain, we all know who he is, him saying that, no, he says, we don't want people on the front lines that we've had to force to be there. We want people that want to serve, that understand how important this is, that are not going to just get out there and shoot people. We want military people, not just anybody filtering in for any reason. So what you're saying now really resonates with me, that people are just signing up, thinking they're going to get an education, hoping they never see war, and who knows what's going to happen. But it's not, that mindset is very different from a military person's.
Wow. Well, two things to address there. I chuckled because one of the funny things is I did meet a couple of people who were like, I joined to kill people. I'm going to kill everyone, every terrorist, every enemy. And so there are some of those a little too hoorah people, right? You don't want to send them out there. I definitely met those people, and they always chuckled because every time you get to a new command in the military, it's always like, why did you join? Let's go around. No one wants to share, but one of the other things is people join with, you said, that expectation of not going out to see combat. And one of the things that kind of hit me the deepest in the service was the ship offered these group therapy and counseling sessions. And I said, I'd like to go see if I could get resources to help people, because a lot of suicidal sailors would come and talk to me. I was always that listening ear. And so I wanted to be there for people. So I went, and this one guy broke down crying because there was another suicide, and we had about 15 in a year and a half. And so this was number whatever it was, and it was his friend. And he was crying because we were stationed in Newport News, Virginia. He goes, we've lost so many people countryside. This was supposed to be the time of our lives before deployment, when we were in the States and we were on shore tour, and we got to go home every day and party, and we're losing people left and right. And I wasn't prepared for that. I was prepared to lose people overseas maybe, but in home port, and that's, I think it was dead silent, and just him crying, that kind of stung everyone to have that reality of, wow, we haven't even gone out to sea yet, and we've lost so many people. And so that kind of was a reality that people weren't expecting. Even I didn't expect it. And then I went to a command where we had about 1 to 3 suicides a month. The flag was always at half mast, and I never knew it was that high. And now I podcast for a living with veterans and active duty military. And Douglas Brinker said the number is around 22 a day, but studies show it's almost up to 44 a day more around. And I think he said women's veteran suicides by firearms had gone up about 43% last year. That's kind of just a rough estimate that I remember. And that just blew my mind. And it's interesting because when it comes to suicide, typically women do a softer approach, as we call it. Typically it's
an overdose or
right. Yeah. So to know that it's getting to the point where women are just committing suicide by firearms, which is much more violent, it really highlights that situation. And this is, I spoke recently on another show. It is, black, white, chief, enlisted, officer, man, woman, it doesn't matter. It's all across the board. No one is safe from their own emotions, so to speak. So it really is awful.
And so, is that, are they bringing that with them from trauma before, or is it traumatizing them to be there? And I know this is just your opinion, but those are some staggering numbers, especially with women. So in looking at it, what would you say would be the cause, if you could even peg it?
So I said this before, and I always label as, some people might give me backlash for this, but the suicides, the depression, the anxiety, the stress, those aren't the illnesses. Those are the symptoms of the overarching illness, which is the leadership in the community. That's really what it boils down to, is the leadership, right? Because the leadership overall runs the work schedule, the type of work, the way the sailors are being treated. And those are the three biggest factors affecting our sailors. Now, there is a lot of stuff from back home. Like I said, a lot of military members are running away from something or trying to start a new life. Both are great, right? There's no shame in that at all. Like, it's an option out there for people to repurpose their life. But on top of that, and then work, and then you have the home side. You know, people say the military is lonely. It really is. The relationships, there's just such a gap. And I'll give some personal examples. When I was working 12 hours rotating shift work, I was trying to have a relationship with a woman, and it was to the point where if I wanted to see her, I would have to drive an hour after working a 12-hour shift, spend time with her, drive an hour back, wake up, right? And so sometimes the schedule, you can't manage it. And then sometimes it's just so difficult. And then especially if you're being deployed, going overseas, and the horror stories I have heard are awful too, about, you know, the marriages gone wrong, the people getting married for money gone wrong, the cheating gone wrong on both sides, military wives, military men. And so you have that part of your life, which is a huge part of most people's lives. Especially, you got to think all the military, I want to say like 85% of the people joining are 17 or 18. They're fresh out of high school. So of course they want a relationship. They're either in one that they've had throughout most of high school, and now they're transitioning and their partner is transitioning into college or wherever. Or, you know, they were single throughout all high school. Now they're out on their own and they want to have that young adult life where they have a relationship. So you have that part of their life struggling. And then the connection with family. And a quote that always, you know, every time I say it, it hit me so deep. It was, you know, the reason going back home once you're in the military is so different. I remember when I went back home, it was numbing almost. It was so distant. The reason that happens, especially when you get out full time, is that you didn't learn to live without them. They learned to live without you. They stopped inviting you to events. They stopped calling you because you're always too busy. But you were focused on the mission. You said, hey, I just don't have time for family right now. I'm going to catch up when I get out. And you get out and they're gone. You know, it really, I never realized the reality of that. And when someone had posted that online and I reviewed that and I shared it with all my shipmates, and we were like, wow, it really is true. And it's a pain because whenever you get time off in the military, which is not a lot, especially if you're reactor side like I was, you know, you're working holidays, weekends, nights. When you get a few days off to go home, you're torn because you're like, I haven't had any me time. You know, there was a point where we had a duty day, which is you stay on the ship for 24 hours and you have watches overnight almost every other day. So the point is you would work all day, then work the next day, get home. Now you got to catch up on errands. You got to call family maybe. And then the next day you're back at work for 24 hours. And then you got work the next day, go home. And again, you have those other life stuff. Like if I need to go get my oil changed and I only have 4 hours of free time, well, there goes that, you know? And that's part of the reason, you know, I'm still skinny, because it's like, hey, do you want to go to the gym? Of course. But if I do, that's my only free time. And then I got to go back to work. So now all I'm doing is gym work, gym work. There was a point when I was working 14 to 16 hours and I got home, walked my dog, went to bed, woke up in the middle of the night, walked her, went to bed, woke up, walked her, went to work. And that was all I did. And I was fine with it because I was a workaholic at the time. I wanted to stay in for 20 years. I was super motivated. And maybe it was unhealthy. And part of the issue is they always say, hey, have a work-life balance. And then they don't provide that. And there's a lot of times in the military where I've seen them make these schedules so much harder than it has to be, so much more difficult than it has to be. We have the manpower to arrange things so that everyone can have an appropriate amount of time off. But unfortunately, there's the people who end up staying in the military. You'll have a very few who are like, hoorah, and they want to stay in. The rest are the favoritism. They got in through favoritism and kissing up and screwing over other sailors. Or they're just bitter and hate their lives, right? I've seen it before where a chief is like, well, you know, my wife left me, so we're going to stay at work all day. And it's his second or third divorce, and he's going to go home and have a beer and pass out. But unfortunately, because of that, you have this endless cycle of bitterness where you get to the ship, the people who have been there a little bit longer than you give you a hard time. you get bitter about it. Once you get to their point of power, you do the same to the new people. And it creates this endless cycle of people who don't like their lives just trying to rank up so they can have it better. It's not better because there's always a bigger dog on top of you. And then they just take it on the people below them. And then so no one's happy. Everyone's stuck at work trying to make it more miserable for someone else to make themselves feel better. And then everyone's miserable.
Wow. That's crazy. That is so crazy.
No
And-
wonder they're having trouble getting people going into the Army and the Navy. You know, like that's a terrible way of life and a terrible way for anybody to be living. So
not every base, not every ship, right? You do have different chains of commands, but this is what I personally saw. And this is what a lot of people who have come on my shows have said as well. But I do want to put that disclaimer so no one comes after me saying, well, you know what, I had a great leadership. There are great leaders out there. Like I said, they're far and few in between. I had maybe one or two out of, however many who actually cared about us.
So how did you keep yourself positive, strong, and, in such a hard area? Because listen, to live that day in and day out, and I understand that, at a certain point in my life, that's my life obviously wasn't in the Army or anything like that, but I was in a world where I was flying to my job, and I worked. I got up at 4 o'clock in the morning to fly from one place to another, work 12, 15 hours, and then started and going it all over again. And it's very difficult, and you do, like, I understand where you're coming from. You can't have a life because you're not around, and and by the time you're ready to have a life, nobody's left because they've all left you behind, and nobody, it's like, well, you haven't been around for years, so what did you expect? So how did you cope with all of this happening to yourself? And how did you get out of it to form, to have a strong mindset to even be where you are and who you are now?
The truth is I didn't and I haven't, because what kept me sane was being so focused on taking care of everyone else, being the therapist and comedian. So I actually had a chief stop me once because I got to a breaking point of helping everyone else. And he said, Mr. Whiskey, even Superman couldn't save everyone. And I was like, Chief, I'm more of a team Batman. I hate Superman. But I understand what he was saying, even Superman, ideally this perfect man can do everything right, couldn't save everyone. And he said, you need to take care of yourself too. I was reaching, 0% power. And I think I'm still dealing with everything. There are some days that are really difficult for me. I never sleep almost. I sleep about 2 to 4 hours. And if I do, I have nightmares about being back in the service. And when I was on the submarine, if I did sleep, I dreamt about being on the submarine still. So that was a bit of a nightmare on its own. But there was a smoke pit on base and at the submarine base. And I don't smoke. I've never smoked. But a lot of sailors would be like, oh, go and get a cigarette break. It's authorized. And they would all hang out there, kind of coking and joking. And I would go there and I would listen to everyone. Everyone would talk to me and tell me about all their issues. And that's where the entertainment started coming. I would be their joy. I would come tell funny stories about how awful my dating life was going, and people found it humorous. So it was good entertainment. And it was rough too. There'd be times where everyone left the smoke pit and then I'm standing there. I'm like, all right, well, no one to listen to me, I guess. But
that's what I was going to say. Who helps you? Everyone's
Right.
gone after they've kind of used you for whatever, and then you're left alone, kind of looking around like, well, what do I do? And here you are standing there with your trauma, and no one's really paying attention.
Right. I know when the worst of it came, poetry is what I did, and of course I get feminized. I don't know what the word would be, but belittled for that. But I've spoken before on the show. It's like these peaceful hobbies. I mean, I believe is very toxically male to say, well, if you're de-stressing by gardening or poetry or whatever, it's gay and all that. But unfortunately, what I've talked about is here's how military members de-stress. If I wanted to do it like a real military man, nicotine, alcohol, sex, and sleeping. And they just either sleep away their life. They go home, they sleep, they work, go home, sleep, work. They just drink. And you got 18-year-olds taking a whole bottle of Jack Daniel's whiskey every time they go home to throw up and pass out, and that's what they're going to do. Or weed now, there's a huge weed epidemic throughout the military, or they just are addicted to sex and they take it out on whatever woman or man they can find, which is also awful, and so all these negative de-stressors, and luckily I never fell victim to any of that. I've always been against all that stuff, and so luckily I already had kind of that mindset. And so poetry is what really saved me. I published 2 books of poetry, both 500 pages long, give or take. So far, I've got one coming out hopefully next year. And that's what I do to help channel my emotions. And then I'm also very religious, which I know doesn't work for everyone, but just on the aircraft carrier, at least, sitting outside when I could and just looking out over the ocean and praying, or even just talking to God. And if you don't believe in God, even just talking to the universe, as long as you feel like someone is listening, it's good. And, I've got my dog who always listens. Well, she doesn't listen to me most of the time unless I have food in my hand. But,
Sorry,
is that your whiskey shot?
Yeah, a little whiskey shot.
Can you show a little whiskey shot?
I'll introduce us. Oh, yeah. How sweet.
She's my little 3-pound Chihuahua, turned 7 this past December.
Oh, and, man.
She was great.
What? I tell you, a dog changes your life. I will just tell you that. We all know that. And of course, that's God spelled backwards. So to me, right. It's like, they are the purest animals on the earth because they come in with love. They love you, even if there's people that hurt you, and they go out with love. And so talk about lessons learned from our dogs. It's huge. And so I'm curious, you're the founder of Couple Own Nukes. That's your podcast, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you start that when you were in the Navy at all? Did you have it in your mind after seeing all this and knowing you were going to come out and I want to help? How did that come to be?
So it's interesting. It's
and can you tell us what Nukes means?
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, so I'll start there. So in the Navy, I was an electrician's mate nuclear operator. I always tell everyone, say that 10 times fast, abbreviated EMN. And essentially, the aircraft carriers and submarines are powered by nuclear reactors. And so they need people to monitor those and work on those. And nowadays, it's different. When I joined the military, the numbers estimated were about only 5 to 8% of the U.S. population actually qualified to be in the military. Because you think, well, surely anyone can join. But it used to be they had standards, which is important. Absolutely. I had a 30-plus year Marine come on my show. He served in the Marines for over 30 years. And he said, if the military changes too much, there's no standard, and then we're weak. So it is good to have those standards to make sure that people who can actually, what they don't have is a mental health screening, which I spoke about the other day. That's what they need to see if people, sure, they might be smart enough, they might be strong enough, but emotionally, spiritually, mentally, can they handle this?
Yeah.
Of course, what you present and what they present isn't, what you actually get. So it's hard to do that. But, that's what they have, DEP, which is your delayed enlistment program or whatever it stands for, which is where you're training beforehand. But, it's just a couple of people, high schoolers, getting together with a military guy. And he's like, this is what you can expect. So it's not really realistic. And boot camp is kind of that process. In fact, boot camp is harder than the actual military is. But even then, it's not it's a controlled environment that isn't necessarily realistic to what you're going to deal with every day. And so they really need that. And they could help that with mentorship. There's no mentorship in the military, really. I would say that's one of the most lacking areas. And they don't work with you, on what you actually want to do with your life. It's kind of like, all right, we need you here. This is where you're going. And one of the things I said, if they actually sat down with me and said, Mr. Whiskey, how can we get you to do 20 years? And I said, this is the plan. I worked with a career advisor on a plan. I would still be in. Unfortunately, it's where they needed. But if they sat down with everyone, they could arrange things to have a still fully manned, armed fleet, but with happy people who actually want to do their job and serve their country. But backtracking, I was going to say, so I was a nuclear operator. Of that 5 to 8% of the military that qualifies for that to join the military, only about 1% qualify to be a nuclear operator. You have to take special tests. You have to be feel different. And I was out of a class. So there's 3 schools. And I know that by the end of all 3 schools, when you go to the fleet, I was one of maybe 5 people out of about 30 in my second class that actually made it through. And if I counted all the nukes who actually went through, the what you would call it, the ratio of people who enter the nuke program and come out is, very, very small few who actually make it through the program. And that is due to suicides. It is due to dropping out, through, being reassigned a different rate because you can't handle the academic program there, or you have a lot of malingering, which is faking medical illnesses to either delay whatever part of your training you're in, to get out of training, or to get out of the military. And one of the most unfortunate things, the military has a hard time dealing with the mental health crises because you have so many frauds. People who know, hey, if I do this, this, and this, I can get out of the military. And it takes away from helping people. So the system can't really help you. They'll say, even just to get an appointment, if you're actively in danger, you can be seen that day. If you're kind of in danger, maybe 2 weeks is as soon as you be seen. If you just want to talk to someone, it could be months, just because every single military member almost is trying to get some kind of mental health help. It was so bad in the area I was in, not just the ship, but the civilian doctors in the local areas were booked out for months. So unfortunately, and again, if people like their jobs, if it was less stressful and they had healthy at home, situations and de-stressing, this could be avoided. But so those, you had that 1% of nuclear operators, super unique community. And unfortunately, they're really smart, very strange. And so I was sitting around in a circle of them one day, having some weird conversations, but intriguing intellectual conversations at the same time. And I was like, we're a couple of nukes having this weird conversation. And I had started listening to podcasts. I spent a lot of my free time driving outside the military, and music just got monotonous, boring, listening to same few songs at a time. So I started listening to podcasts again. And there was a comedy life advice podcast I listened to that is great. I still listen to it to this day. And it's actually Charles O'Neill and his son Link. And I was like, I wonder if I'd love to reconnect with my dad. Unfortunately, I don't have a good relationship with him. He broke my mom's skull. Half of her face is made out of metal. He abused me, my siblings. He is a very dangerous man, still on the loose. And I've also had biblical battles with him. He believes that I'm the Antichrist and he's Satan. So there's been a lot of family drama, as you can imagine, and a lot of scarring internally that I still deal with, because when you're raised your whole life being told you're the Antichrist, you have some awful thoughts. Luckily, I'm a preacher, and I try to immerse myself in helpful, supportive communities. And luckily in the military, I did meet a few of those patriotic, religious military men. Again, religion has been almost cut out of the military, not just the military, but the world in general. And so that trickles over. And so I started the podcast to be a comedy, to be weird, conversations. And as I grew more religious, there was a lot of weird conversations that I had to cut out, a lot of things that I was like, it's not appropriate. And the life advice is what really did it. When I knew the nuke epidemic as far as suicide and retention. And when I started having guests on from the Marines and the Army and Air Force, and even just civilian side, hearing about it, I realized in some encounters with other podcasters, talk about, you're out of the military now. Because I just celebrated a few days ago my 1-year anniversary of leaving the military. So I'm still freshly out. And the whole past year has been job transitioning and life transitioning and a reevaluation of my life as a young adult. And I realized, I've always been passionate about helping others and about spreading the word and creating. And so podcasting, voice acting, author, that all allows me to do that. And so I've been podcasting and I've switched it. There's still some comedy, as Ms. Nicole said, I am funny. Her words, not mine. And trying to spread that message. And so Couple of Nukes is my main podcast where it's comedy and life advice. And it's phrased as join Mr. Whiskey, sometimes called Captain Whiskey, on this voyage across the seas of our lives. Seas that are both turbulent at times with storms, but also peaceful paradises. And, so it's where you are part of the crew. So it's supposed to be interactive. Like we're all on this voyage together. And so you have episodes where you and some sailors are making port calls and you hear the funny stories about drunk sailors in other countries. And then you have some sit downs with veterans who tell you about Vietnam or about some of the sailors they lost. And, the oldest veterans on my show are always the greatest, conversations, because as much as we said, that ages with experience, they've experienced a lot. And so what they have to share with us is always amazing wisdom and stories. And it really touches me.
When you talk to them, you being just newly out, them being seasoned veterans, what do they see the military as today compared to when they were in the military? Can they see what's going on?
So to quote the old vets, they see a bunch of pussies, a bunch of baby faces. But because a lot of them, I've been fortunate where there's a lot of vets who are open-minded and actually see the issues. Unfortunately, the most closed-minded military members are the ones who are still in charge, most of them. And that's the issue. There's a lot of, back in my day, and I've suffered that in the civilian world as well. I was working at a chemical plant when I got out, 12-hour rotating shift work, and everyone in charge of me had been there for 30 to 40 years, and it creates this mindset, same with people who stay in the military for a while, that, I know everything because I've been in longer, or you should have joined when I joined, or I'm older than you. And there's a lot of age belittlement in the military. There's a lot of, you should have joined sooner. I'm already 17 and in the military. I don't know how sooner you want me to join.
12. Yeah.
And it's worse with the military because the military is a time warp. I always express this where a week in the military is actually 2 weeks, because when you're working 12 hours and you're trying to maximize your free time, or you're working overnights or holidays when you're always working, because military members don't sleep much, you live double the life of civilians. And so, we've always said it, and this describes it the best: the days are long and the weeks are short, because one day will feel like forever, and then you blink and you're like, oh, it's Friday, or it's Sunday. It's already in the next week, and time goes by fast.
Yeah. And it doesn't sound like they're being progressive at all, though, because you mentioned, they need counselors and you can't get in to talk to someone. So is that old conditioned mindset? Are they also mired in it that they don't see this need for like actual help?
It really depends. It's the military is such a big organization encompassing all the different branches that change. The trickle down for change is forever, and we did have civilians come onto our ships with these tablets, and they were asking everyone to fill out surveys. Now, this was only because so many people had taken their own lives. One of the petty officers who trained me said, Mr. Whiskey, do you understand why it's so bad that they are now enacting change after all the suicides? I said, no, not really. He goes, well, the military has just proven, hey, if enough people kill themselves, we'll actually do something about it. And now you're going to have a bunch of depressed sailors who don't value their lives saying, well, I'm going to be a martyr for my ship and I'm going to make the change, which is awful. That's not the mindset we want at all. No. And so a lot of, at least in the Navy, hopefully we're seeing that mindset is spreading in the direction of, hey, we don't want people to think that way. So we're going to walk on eggshells and do what we can do. So we had people come on after all the suicides with tablets, and they would be like, would you fill out a survey for a gift card? And I filled one out, and it was like, how would you improve this, and this? And, we filled those out. I've done it at least twice. And everywhere you go, every time you leave any command or training in the military, they have these feedback forms. And, the high ups always say, take this seriously. We're going to look at this. But I don't know if they really do. Honestly, I have to doubt it, because they just don't make the changes, or they just can't. Again, part of the issue with the military is, I'll call it the red tape, the paperwork. There's always bigger dog. Like I said, you got big Navy, then you got your ship, and then you got your divisions and all that. And in between all of those are admirals or chiefs or officers. So then you've got the government, and the military is both a reflection of the government and the state of our politics in the country, and then also not, so it's a very amorphous creation that is hard to enact change in. And a lot of sailors don't stay in, or soldiers don't stay in for the whole term, because they're like, hey, why would I do 20 years to, quote, become the change that I want to see? Guess what? They have all these stories of people who stayed in for the 20 years and could do nothing, that they want to make change, and all they could change was the lives of maybe 5 sailors in their division, which,
Wow.
again, any change is better than none. But it's like, do I want to give up my life to try and make this small, small impact in the military that cost me my relationship with my family, with my loved one, with I didn't get to travel where I wanted. I didn't get to live the life I wanted. I, slaved away for the man, and really didn't get much benefit out of it. So, and even now the military they just changed it so it's even more difficult to get the college education benefits, which is the biggest thing I see people going in for now.
Yeah, I was
Now,
just going
if
to
you,
say. Yeah, I've
right.
heard some people, that go in and hoping that that's where they're going. They're going to get an education so that they can upgrade themselves.
Right. And I believe they just changed it to now, if you want the education benefits to be able to pass on to your significant other or your children, you have to stay in for 12 years now. And people are like, look, it's not worth it. And even college now isn't worth it. Now, I've always been anti-college, so I'm biased, but the truth is, you look at it, people are going to college for 4 to 8 years, getting a degree, and they can't get hired anywhere because the job market is saturated. The companies are very strict with who they're hiring. And so now you did 4 years or 6 years in the military to do 4 years of college, to now you're in your 30s, and it's like, hey, I still can't get a job, and I'm going to go live with my mom. So it's like there's no good incentives. And you see a lot of young adults are being entrepreneurs because they can't get a traditional job. Obviously, I'm guilty of that. But, the issue is now you have a saturation of entrepreneurs and podcasters and authors all competing with each other. Add into that, now you got AI technology creating almost human quality pieces of entertainment in a fraction of the time. And it's like the job market and the education field are in such a tumultuous time that, like, the military can't use those as incentives anymore. And I see bonuses through the roof. I mean, I'm seeing regular, just basic jobs, like just swabbing the poop deck, so to speak, for a $25,000 sign-on bonus. I know when I left, they were talking about offering $120,000 to anyone who would stay in Nuke. And you don't hear the "hoo-yah, Nuke power." You hear the "hell no." You hear that people were wearing paper clips, which stood for "People Against People Ever Re-enlisting. Civilian Life is Preferred." There was people that were like, no, you could not offer me enough money to stay in and deal with this lifestyle, with these people, this leadership, to this environment. And so I know I get ads every day to join the Navy or the Air Force, because I originally was going Air Force, and then they tried to swap my job on me the day before I shipped out. So that's how I ended up Navy. And I get ads every day, and it's like, you can make $100,000. In fact, the recruiting website, when I joined, the initial pay grade I joined as, it was about $20K a year you were making. And now it's advertising $70K a year, which is completely false. Because I know people who are they're not making $70K a year. And so now I don't know if they're just lying or if they're planning on changing things. It's awful. And I always get upset too when I see politicians sending, for example, $165 billion to Ukraine, but then our military members have enough money to live, barely. I had a shipmate, he was paying $1,600 for rent, and his paycheck was only $900 twice a month. It's like, what do you have left over then? And you're
Nothing.
like, oh, you got the food and the medical and the dental. Those benefits don't outweigh it. Medical was only open during my working hours, not on the weekend, not after hours. And anytime I try to go to medical or my shipmates, it was turned away, come back later, or you're fine. Or they don't want to document anything because they're instructed by Big Navy not to track stuff like that. And unfortunately, I just the medical horror stories. I mean, I have a couple episodes on those alone, and it's awful.
Yeah, I have heard some horror stories about the military hospitals and the veterans, and I just can't believe that there is so little care for people that have served their country. You're not even you are no longer a person. You're just a
I'm fighting every
body.
day. I'm fighting
Yeah.
every day just to get the medical help I need for my service related injuries. Even now, it's been over a year. You know, I know people who have fought for way longer. I knew a guy who the reason he got out of the military was he smoked weed and got kicked out for it. He goes, I waited a year for a single medical appointment, and it was down to a 15-minute therapy session where they were like, you control your emotions, just be happy. And it got to the point where he just smoked weed so he could work. And, you know, there's a lot of debate right now in the military over, you know, if weed is legal, why can't it be a recreational activity like alcohol? And it's gotten to the point because they just kick people out for weed and then it's a general discharge upgraded honorable after 6 months if you have a clean record. I knew, I want to say almost hundreds of sailors who were smoking weed and either telling on themselves or just getting caught and leaving and
Doing it
getting all
on
the
purpose.
benefits. And so people just want to get out.
So, you know, okay, so we see that the people go into thinking that they're going to have a better life. And now you're at a point where you have already left because life wasn't better. And matter of fact, it turned into worse. How has your life changed now that you have been out of the military and you started to progress into your own world and develop into what you're hoping to get?
Well, you have me in a pretty heated mood talking about all of this. You know, it was my 1 year anniversary, and I actually had a reunion with two sailors who got out a week before and after me. And until seeing them and talking to them, I had cooled down quite a bit. I had put everything in a box, which isn't healthy, but a lot of veterans do that. A lot of active members do it, and because I've just as soon as I got out, even on the drive home that day, I had an 8 hour. I got out around 1700, which is 5 p.m. for those of y'all who don't know, and I had an 8 hour drive ahead of me, so I didn't get to Georgia till about 2 a.m. between all the stops. And as soon as I was in that car, it was like the Navy's gone. And it's not that I'm not appreciated. The thing I missed the most, and any service member will say this, was the people that I met. You know, it wasn't the job, it wasn't the leaders, it was the people I met. You know, your brothers and sisters. And there's plenty of people I don't miss from the service. Don't get me wrong. There are people I don't want to catch civilian side, and you know, but you know, it's just like there are days I try not to, and I asked my buddy recently as I saw him, I was like, "Have you thought about the Navy at all?" He goes, "I try not to, but there's something every day," and you know, almost in tears, I had to agree with him. You know, there are just your brain just if I could control it better, I would, but it'll just bring up a random memory from the Navy, military,
Yeah.
or I'll see something that trigger it, or hear something that triggers it, and one thought leads to another, and you get down the rabbit hole of bad memories, and it'll just ruin my whole day. Because I'll be walking my beautiful little princess, my dog, and it's a sunny day, and I'm drinking sweet tea, just walking around, minding my own business. And as soon as one of those thoughts hits me, it's like I just so much regret and bitterness. And even as a modern day preacher, and that's Radiating Faith. You mentioned my other podcast. That's where I preach. You know, even as a religious man, it's hard for me, even though I'm so everything happens for a reason, God's plan, and I'm thankful for the people I met and I've helped. And I could never be doing what I'm doing now if it wasn't for the military. Even with all those benefits, it's still like, wow, that was such a period of my life that I wish I could forget. And y'all asked me how I dealt with it. And even now, it's like through my writing, through my podcasting, getting to kind of vent and discuss this with some people and hopefully make a change one day or make an impact, you know, and that's the biggest thing. And I'd like ultimately one day to help work either with the military or create a program for enlisted sailors, for young, you know, sailors going in to help them.
Yeah,
That sounds like it
exactly.
would be very beneficial
Oh
for
gosh.
of doing that, because unfortunately it sounds like there hasn't been any dramatic change or change really for the better. It seems like the change is going down the tubes. And how do we expect our people who are out there and giving of themselves in service that they are actually being depleted instead of actually building their character and building their own selves up? And that's, I guess, one of the hardest parts of it. But the other part I see is the strength of the people that have been there forever, getting there in their little cubicles of how they think that the life should be run, and you have to fit into that cubicle.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
And it just seems like it's so conditioned for so long that no one's willing to change. And you have to be progressive in every area of your life for your whole life. And that's disturbing to me.
So tell me, what message would you give out to people that are either in the military and struggling, or just coming out of the military, or possibly even that have been out for a while? They're obviously still having a lot of their own struggles. And just as you said, you still have your own struggles. What type of message could you give to somebody who is in that area of life where it is a struggle, the triggers, all of this thing? How do you move forward?
It's really difficult to answer that. This has actually been the loneliest part of my life, because now I'm at a point where I'm disconnected from my family, not just because of the service and the family drama, but also now the friends I made, some of them just got deployed to the Middle East. Some of them just got deployed to the South Oceans, and our lives are so busy. The military is out of sight, out of mind. We live such different lives. Like, I'll get a phone call every now and then, and it's hard. You play a lot of phone tag because this guy's on midnights, or you're on days, and vice versa. And all the other friends I've made now are podcasters or authors that I've met online or through conventions. And so all I have is me and my dog, and it's really lonely. And so getting out, like, I just called the American Legion yesterday, and I said, hey, like, I really need a community. And that's what I would suggest, even though I haven't been a part of it yet. Just talking to the lady on the phone and hearing what they have to offer, and just like my prayer groups that I'm a part of, having that community of relatable people. You'll see a lot of veterans are friends with just other veterans, military guys and gals, and it's like they haven't moved on. It's hard, our it changes us. I really believe that, even just working in the civilian world, I've tried, and it's like having that military grind set, and then I'm working with, civilians, especially the younger side, my generation, who are so lazy, have no work ethic, and they don't know how good they have it. They're very spoiled. And having lost people, having had my friends take their lives, having seen people have their dreams torn away from them, from either medical injuries in the service, or just politics within the service, or just wherever the mission takes us. Transitioning out has been one of the most difficult things, even though, I had a buddy call me the other day crying about to take his life, who had served with me. And he was like, Mr. Whiskey, I thought this was going to be the time of our lives. We're out, we're free. And unfortunately, he had personal events going on now. And now it's like, cool, now you got rid of the service part, but you're battling with the lingering effects of that. Now you've got time to focus on and catch up with all the other issues you put off in life: family, relationships, getting a new job. And it is very difficult. So my message would be, it does get better, which I hated that message in the fleet. I really did. Because in the fleet, in the service, it's not true. Every time we got to a training commander, they're like, don't worry, the next one is better. The next one is better. And it got worse and worse. But when you get out, it does get better, because now you have the freedom to actually do what you want in life, and to help the people you want in life, and to live the life you want. And so I would say, find a way to de-stress, even if you feel like you don't have any baggage from the service. You really do. And, so that would be my message. Make sure you unpackage everything slowly in a safe environment and with people you trust, and to slowly get rid of all of that to help build your new life without having anything holding you back, and to discover yourself as well, to spend that first year out really figuring out who you are and what direction you want your life to go in. Because if you just get out with no purpose or identity, you're either going to end up back in or on the streets.
Yeah, and celebrating who you are is such an important venture in our own lives. And be proud. Like, you know what? Um, I am a Canadian coming here, but Canadians and American, we're tight. We're under the same umbrella, and so as a Canadian slash American, let's say, I thank you for your service and for what you've done and for what you're doing. And I want you to learn to celebrate yourself, because, you're one hell of a guy. And for what you
Thank
do,
you.
I love the fact of, our part of my mission is to help others as well. And I love this. And, it's just important that we all need a community. We can't manage to live a life in solidarity. It doesn't work. We're not meant for that. We're meant to be together. We're meant to bring each other up and hold space for one another. And that's what true life is supposed to be about. So I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for what you've done, and let you know that, here on Let's Get Real, we're here. We're here as a community and holding space for you at any and all times.
Well, thank you kindly for the words. I appreciate that.
And I want to thank you for joining us today on Let's Get Real. And you've been very real to a lot of people who don't even think and know what people go through in joining the military. A lot of people feel that the military is a safe place where you can have the education, you can learn the skills that you need to learn and build yourself. And it's unfortunate to see that such an important part in the world is actually being knocked down instead of being built up. So but we want to be grateful for you joining us today and letting us in on the true things of where things are in the world. And we all can look at things a little different, and it's important for people to know where things are. Nicole, what can you say about today? What you can share with us from what you have heard today?
This has probably been one of the most enlightening conversations that we've had on here, because we haven't had anyone on talking about the military. And I do come from a military family, right back from an uncle that liberated Germany in the Battle of the Bulge. His tank got blown up, was on the cover of Life magazine. So, you hear some of those stories, but you don't think that is happening today just because we're not at war per se. But there seems to be a battle in the ranks, in on the boat, in people's mental health. And to know that there's so many people suffering like that, it's really disheartening in terms of no one seems to be talking about it or seems to care, because you just hear of the, like you talk about trying to get just a doctor's appointment, trying to get a counselor. And there's so many people that, when I think of your podcast, I'm like, people need to talk. People need to be heard. People need to be listened to. And so I'm so glad you're doing that. But in my heart, I'm like, how can I be of help? Because I hear you, I see you, I've heard very bad stories, and I'm not saying you're wartime, but it's not getting any better from what I'm hearing. And my question is, how can I help? So keep that in mind. But we all need somebody. We all need support. We all need to be heard and not judged. And it just makes me think about people out there that are so intolerant, not having ever known your story, what you've been through, what you know, what you've seen, and what you've heard. So my message for everyone else today is you don't know what's going on in someone's mind, what's taking place in their heart. And all I can tell anyone that watched this and or is listening or will listen is kindness. I'm not hearing anything about kindness in your conversation, Mr. Whiskey, and I'm very disappointed at sometimes in my fellow humans or mankind that they can't exhibit kindness, which I always have told my girls from the time they could listen to me, is kindness is free. Whether it's opening a door for somebody, saying thank you to somebody, or just listening to somebody. And, that's very, very disturbing. So I would love to reach out to you and talk some more about this if I can be of help in any way, because one thing I do is I go in and I find someone's trauma and I help them release it. And it sounds like there's a lot of trauma in our military. I know there has been, obviously, with what we've been through, but we're, like I said, we're not even really technically in any war right now, and there's people killing themselves.
Right.
So thank you for being the authenticity and the vulnerability that you've exhibited today is just off the charts. So thank you so much for that.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you both so much for letting me spread this message. I really appreciate it.
Oh, yeah. Very important.
And for those who would like to reach out to Mr. Whiskey, below our video is one of his links that you can reach out to him and connect up to him. And, your message is strong and bold. And yeah, we just all need to spread a little sunshine in somebody's life. So, the little bit of kindness, and I totally with you, Nicole. You never know what people are going through or what they've been through, or
Right.
all of it. It's all about having to learn to have a little bit of compassion, understanding, and lend an ear. And if anybody wants to listen, what is the name again of your podcast today, Mr. Whiskey?
Couple of Nukes. So that's couple and then O apostrophe, because I'm Southern, Nukes. So couple O Nukes, and then Radiating Faith for those of y'all who want to get that more faith-based podcast.
Lovely.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining us and for coming
Yes,
on
ma'am.
today and spreading this very important message. Thank
Yes,
you.
ma'am. Thank both of you.
Forward. Thank you.